Show you what this waistline do. Do all sorts of things to you. I wanna make you my boo. Now I want to whine on you. Show you what this body do. Put this body. What is up, you guys? It is D. Welcome and welcome back to my channel. And today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to go about doing some binding. So for some of you guys who don't know, binding is actually a very important thing to learn in fashion, especially if you're going to be a person who is sewing like shirts, for instance. There is a top. I will show you guys an example after I'm done showing you guys this tutorial, but there is a top that I did once and it required me to do some binding because I only had like one layer. I didn't double line my fabric and I needed to do some binding on the arm sky section, as well as I think also, I don't know if I did it on the neckline as well, but I'll show you guys later on. Binding, there are two ways to go about binding. And the first one is doing it manually with the sewing machine. And this can be tricky. It honestly requires a little bit of patience, a lot of trials and errors. And I don't even know if this one that I'm going to show you guys now is going to be perfect because this binding is relatively thin. Now with binding, you can buy this at your fabric stores. Binding is available in different kinds of fabrics. You can get binding. This is in satin. You can also get binding in cotton. You can get binding in just about anything, or you can also do your own binding. Yeah. So if, for instance, maybe the fabric that you're working with is not available in binding, then what you can do is you can just cut a nice strap, and you decide how wide you want it to be. I think this is like a 2 centimeter. If I'm not mistaken, binding, because when you fold it over, as you can see, it's like relatively thin, and I'm kind of worried that this is not going to come out properly. But what I'm going to do is actually, I think I should just make another example over here and just kind of cut away from here and create a binding strap. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's an example, okay? So this is going to be another DIY binding that I can show you guys. So this fabric is calico and my binding is in satin. This was some leftover binding that I had recently bought. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, actually, before we get started, I didn't mention the second way you can go about installing binding. So in fashion, as you guys know, we have a lot of machines for different types of things. We've got machines for hemming, or we got overlockers, we've got sewing machines, and we also have a binding machine, which basically does all of this for you so neatly, so tidy. You don't even have to worry, as long as you've got the exact measurements that you are going to need for your binding set on your machine, and it will literally come out like a piece of cake. So I'm going to show you guys, because the top that I did last year, it required me to bind it, and I did use the binding machine at school, and it came out so beautifully. Anyways, without any further ado, let's just get started, okay? Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys quickly. So as you can see, I've already started with my binding process. So usually what I like to do whenever I get started with binding, and this is something that I've also learned with the binding machine, is that you want to kind of like, let me just turn my machine a little bit around. But as you can see, we've got this little peak of binding that is peeking out here. You want to kind of have like, usually they say about 5 centimeters worth of binding already sticking out. So that way your binding strip comes out relatively neat and tidy, and you can make sure that the fabric is actually in the binding, because at the end of the day, you're going to be taking this piece of fabric right here and you're going to sandwich it. Basically, you're going to take this binding and you're going to sandwich it in this, so you're going to sandwich this material in your binding and you're going to start sewing. And you want to make sure that like your binding is equal on both ends, like on both sides. And that way, whatever that you're sewing at the top, it catches at the bottom. Because sometimes, and this is why I'm saying binding with the sewing machine, it's usually a trial and error. And it really requires you to have a lot of patience when you get started, because chances are this will come out properly on this side, but on the other side, it will just be loose. And chances are you might see this in this video. So let's get started, okay?
Okay, so what I like to do is I just like to make sure that everything aligns on the center of the binding. That way, when I fold it over, it kind of makes sense. So I'm gonna just go in there, and you want to try to get as close to excuse me, you want to try and get as close to the edge as possible, but not too out. You need to be careful because at the end of the day, sewing with a domestic machine and sewing with an industrial machine is completely different. Also, the surface as well is completely different. While with a domestic machine, it's going to be really difficult if you're sewing such a thin strip of binding, while with with an industrial sewing machine, this process is literally a piece of cake. The only thing that you need to worry about is that making sure that your binding is catched on both sides of your fabric. So let's just, just do the doing things, man. Let's just do the doing things. So just go slow. Don't rush. No pressure. Actually, I'm nervous. Don't judge me. Okay, let's go. So I don't know if you guys are noticing, but I've learned this thing. It's not really, I wouldn't say it's a trick per se, but I'm so sorry, guys. My spirit is so low. I'm hungry, but I'm still cooking, so I need to be patient. But one thing I've noticed, right, when I sew anything that's relatively thin and I feel like it's just, gonna give me problems, is that I try to kind of like curve it, so that way it sticks to the area that I want it to be. So I know that this is a relatively thin section. It's not even out of the foot, right? So what I do is I kind of like curve it a little bit so that it sticks to this line that I want to stick to. So let's go ahead. Also, another thing is don't be afraid to feel around your fabric, because one thing I've learned is that when you feel around, you kind of have an idea of where the binding is sitting on the other side, because you can't actually see the other side, right? So yeah, let's continue. Let's just do this thing. Okay, so as you can see, it's not relatively straight. Now, I also want to just show you guys, because I can already tell that there are pieces here that have not been catched. So you see what I mean when I say that binding is a trial and error type of situation. Some of these errors are picked up and majority of it is not picked up. And in fashion, usually what they make us do is you're going to start all over, baby, until you catch everything. Now, satin is a very slippery fabric. It's sneaky like that, my best suggestion is you literally try to be as patient as possible. Now let's see if I can do this with the binding strip that I actually made. So with the binding strip that I made, I know that, okay, let's just show you guys here. So this is the binding strip, right? So I'm just going to fold. So I know like, okay, cool. If I fold it like this is the halfway point of it, right? So I'm just going to fold it in like this over here. And usually what you do is you would iron this section, just iron it. But I'm not going to iron it. I'm just going to press on it with my hands and just kind of like create that line that I want, which is like my center line, all right? And then what you can do is you can open it, right? And then just kind of fold it here. As you can see, now it becomes a relatively thin strip. So let's fold as we go. Fold as we go. Did I mention that this is calico? Yeah, this is calico. Okay, so we're just going to fold. See what I mean? And then what we're going to do is we are going to fold here again. Now we have like a nice binding strip, and it works. Then after that, you're just gonna refold it like this. That way it's like nice and neat. Okay, there's a lot of frills on this calico, but yeah, but basically like this. So I'm just going to show you guys. I do think binding with, other fabrics is much more easier than binding with satin. So let me go ahead and just show you guys. But this is basically how my binding strip is going to look like. And, you already know that I'm going to basically snackwich it in here. I'm going to snackwich this fabric in this binding, and I'm just going to leave a space there at the top. You're more than welcome to start at the top, but just make sure that you leave out a very large amount of space, like maybe 5 to 10 centimeters large. That way you can start maybe from like 5 centimeters and just kind of sew a straight line going down. Okay, let's just do that. Okay, so now I've inserted it, and I am just going to go ahead. Guys, whenever you're doing this, please don't feel the pressure. Okay, feel it, but don't feel it a bit too much. Don't get emotionally attached, because literally binding took us days in first year to do it. Like, it was difficult because our lecturers kept on saying, go back, unpick it. It's not done the way it's supposed to be done, because it's not catching on the other side. And when you're doing this with a binding machine, I swear to you guys, so much easier. Okay, now I've got my binding. I put in my thread and my needle, and I did my first little stitch over there. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start sewing. And if you guys are not necessarily certain like where your binding is sitting, you are allowed to kind of like make a slightly bigger gap, right? But just watch and let's see if I'm going to catch it. Okay. I'm just feeling to make sure that my fabric is actually in there. Oh gosh. Okay, cool. Let's go. Okay. Much better, you guys. Oh my god. Okay, so look at this one, right? If I had to compare it like with the satin one, this one came out so much better. And you know why? Because baby, it catched at the back. Okay, I do think my tension is a bit off. I didn't set this tension properly for calico, but you guys can see basically what I mean, right? Hold on. So you guys can see basically like this was so much easier to catch, and which is why I prefer to create my own binding, especially if I know that I'm going to be sewing with my sewing machine at home. I prefer to do my own binding than buying binding, but you can buy binding. I just feel like satin is just really a slippery, sneaky fabric. Literally, you'll feel like it has your back, and then when you look at it, you realize that actually it left you in the deep end with no way out. So yeah, so this is binding with your sewing machine, and this is generally how it's supposed to kind of look like. Obviously yours is going to be neater than mine. I am just passing on the instructions. The journey is yours to take. So I also want to show you guys quickly how binding with a binding machine looks like. Oh my gosh, when I tell you guys that this thing is the doing things that needs to be done by the doing people. Okay, so this t-shirt is a little bit dirty, don't mind it, but I just want you to show you, like, look at this. So you see with the binding machine, they are like, it's a twin needle at the binding machine, and this is how it looks like on the other side. So basically it folds the fabric for you, like it literally. So what you would do is, like, the same way I cut the strip of fabric is the same way you will cut the strip of fabric. So you will know that, okay, cool. So what usually happens is that your binding machine, right? I just want to show you an example. So its foot is a little bit different. You could say that it has like an extended feature that kind of like goes out like this, and it kind of looks like wire that kind of goes like this in a very up and down motion. And then what you will do is you will take, let me just take another piece of binding that I have over here. So while you have like this up and down wire thingy going on, it kind of like you put your binding in like this, and then you kind of put you push it in there in the foot. And then what you would do is then it will have like another opening section, which is like for your fabric, so that it kind of pulls the fabric. And while it's pulling the fabric, it's also folding the binding for you, and it kind of snakishes everything in there, and it all comes out looking like this at the top. Okay, focus on me, focus on me. Okay, so it kind of looks like this at the top, and it looks like this at the on the inside. And look at how neat this is. Like, it kind of looks like it's hemming while it's sewing at the same time. Like, it's beautiful. I love this. So I did this with stretchy material, and you could use binding machines for like with stretchy materials and non-stretch materials. And that's the one thing that I love about binding. So I hope this video was informative. I mean, it was not hurrah, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, binding, moral of the story is that it's a very tricky process. And as a third year student, you can see myself, I'm not particularly good at it. And it just comes to show that with fashion, practice makes perfect. And I've not been practicing binding. I'm not even going to lie. The amount of times that I use binding are like very slim. So for you guys who actually want to include binding in your designs, I would really suggest that you actually practice with as much fabric as possible. So yeah, I hope you guys like this video. Catch you on the flip side.